of Ages, cleft for me. Let me hide myself in thee. Let the water and the blood from thy riven side which flowed be of sin the double cure. Save from wrath and make me pure. Should my tears forever flow, could my zeal no languor know, these for sin could not atone. Thou must save, and thou alone. In my zeal no price I bring, simply to thy cross I cling. While I draw this fleeting breath, when I close my eyes in death, as I rise to worlds unknown, and behold thee on thy throne, Rock of Ages, cleft for me, let me hide myself in thee.
Ned Little passed in peace in Longmont, Colorado, September 18, 2020. Born to Arthur and Leela D. Hart Little, February 2, 1934, on a farm outside of Bakelman, Nebraska. Married to Colleen Rickard, April 15, 1963. Raised on a sandhill farm in southwest Nebraska, Ned Little was working horse and mule teams alongside his father at an early age. An ambitious young man, he sold his first horse for a profit at age 10. Ned would continue to farm, helping his father and running his own operation into his early 20s when he went on to pursue his life's passion, buying and selling horses. In 1963, Ned would meet his wife Colleen Little in Denver, Colorado at a horse sale. They would marry the same year and start their business, Ned Little Horse Company. They had 2 children, Rick Little and Monica Little Rhodes. By any standard, Ned was an extremely hardworking man. Through self-will and determination, he and his wife grew their business into one of the largest equine acquisition and distribution companies in the country, operating throughout the United States and in Canada and Mexico. A businessman, horseman, and cowboy, Ned was able to accomplish any goal he set for himself, including owning a ranch, operating a sale barn, and running a trucking company. There was not a challenge he was unwilling to take on, from gathering wild horses on the plains of Wyoming to driving a team of home-raised Blue Roan mares from Fort Lupton, Colorado to Bakelman, Nebraska in his 70th year. Ned would go forward and succeed in doing things others thought could and sometimes should not be done. Despite all of his individual accomplishments, his greatest joys were enjoying his grandchildren and great-grandchildren. In his later years, he loved nothing more to sit on his golf cart and watch his grandkids have fun around the arena or in the yard. Quick-witted and armed with a unique sense of humor, Ned was always up for a laugh and was a great storyteller. He was a steadfast husband, a tough, loving father, caring, gentle grandfather, loyal friend, and a real-world mentor. He will be missed by so many. Go rest high on that mountain, cowboy. Your work on earth is through. I know God has plenty of stock in heaven, and they're holding that in-gate until you take your seat alongside the ring. Preceded in death by son Rick Little, sisters June Little Stam, Maxine Little Waters, Ernestine Little Smith, Geraldine Little Pursley, and in-laws Cloyce and Helen Rickard, and granddaughter Amy Little. Survived by wife Colleen Little Rickard, daughter Monica Little Rhodes, and husband Asa Rhodes, sister Joyce Little Vincent, grandchildren Matthew Little and wife Marie Presidio Little, Lacey Hardy, Aaron Little, Perouse, and husband Mark Perouse, Shiloh Rowe, and Jared Logan. Great-grandchildren Haley Rowe, Ava Little, Marilyn Hardy, Lila Little, J.C. Rowe, Anita Little, and Ethan Perouse. So I think, as everyone knows, my granddad was well known in the horse business and throughout the horse world, and the stories about him and the things that he's done, that I think he'll live on through those stories. And today I'd just like to say a few things and convey to everyone the type of person that he was to me, and I think maybe this will ring true with some other people. I had the opportunity from the time I was born to spend a lot of time with my granddad. He was a very busy man, but no matter how busy he was, he would take time and pick me up and take me with him. And he liked to say that I spent more time sleeping on the seat of his truck than I did in my own bed. And in my early years, I'm sure that there was a lot of truth to that. I sat on his lap as he mowed, and sat in his lap in the Bobcat. I sat behind him for miles as he was fixing fence, driving horses. And I followed him up and down the catwalks at sale barns from Helena, Montana to El Paso, Texas, and everywhere in between. When I was a child, all those times I spent with him, it meant so much. But in my late teen years, I was pretty aimless. I didn't have a lot of direction. Wasn't sure what I wanted to do. So he called me up the summer after I turned 19, and he thought it'd be a good idea for me to come live with them and learn the family business. So I moved up, and I spent the next 20 years. Almost every day with my granddad. Through that time, he taught me the horse business, and I absorbed as much of it as I could. But he taught me so much more. He instilled in me a work ethic. He taught me how to read people. He taught me how to act in public. And those are things that someone like I was just pretty wild, aimless teenager that at a point in my life when I needed that person, I needed that mentor and that friend, and he was there for me. And while he was, guiding me and teaching me what he knew about the horse business, I made a lot of mistakes. He kind of turned me free, but he never criticized my mistakes. He might mention to me what he would do, but he never criticized me. He just asked me what I was going to do to correct the mistakes I'd made. And through that, he built up a confidence in me that to this day I can go back to, and I hope someday I'm able to be a mentor to someone like that. A lot of people in life, whether it's a friend or it's a family member, they're able to find that person, and that person was my granddad for me. I have no idea how much time we spent together through the years, but I can tell you now, and I have been for a long time, I was able to be with my granddad in his later years, and you appreciate that time you're able to spend with your relatives, especially someone like that I was so close to. The one thing I'll say about my granddad, I don't think anyone in here will disagree with this, is that he was a colorful character, and he was a complicated individual. But the one thing he taught me, well, he taught me many things, but the one thing that I'll always remember is you know, he would do something and he wouldn't try to pretend what he was doing was right, or he wouldn't try to pretend that it was wrong. And he would, you know, that meant a lot. You know, there's going to be times in your life when you do things and you know they're not right. But if you're able to be honest with yourself, and you know what you're doing is not right, I think you can move forward. And that was a very valuable lesson that I learned from him.
Mark Bishop's going to say a few words for us. Thanks, Mark.
Hello, everybody. Good to see a lot of faces I haven't seen in a long time. I'll apologize if I don't remember your name, but I recognize a lot of faces, though. What a more appropriate place for us to be to remember and reflect upon the life of Ned Little. He spent more of his life in one of these than he probably did anywhere else. Well, maybe a pickup or a truck, one of the two, but was a busy man. And he wore many hats. He was a husband, a father, a grandfather, a great-grandfather, a businessman, a horseman, a cowboy, a teamster, and he was a friend. He was a good friend. And I'm thankful that some 25, 26 years ago, whenever it was, I was working for Sombrero at the time, and Keith Hagler introduced me to Ned Little at Mile High Livestock. And that was a great benefit to me in my lifetime. And I think if it wasn't for that, if I hadn't known Ned, I probably wouldn't know some of y'all today, because we met through him. And that's been a blessing to my life as well. And I know that y'all share with me the appreciation for Ned and the way that he helped you in your lifetime like he's helped me. I know Ned had supplied horses for some of y'all that worked in the feedlot. Y'all rode them, sold them, split the proceeds. He provided horses to, if you were working on a ranch, or for me, he bought horses for our company. Several times I'd get a phone call and it was Ned. And he's like, well, I traded for some horses over the weekend. They're perfect for your deal. I'm on my way. Are you at the corral? Yes, sir, I am. Come on by. And he'd bring them by and drop them off. And he was right. And they worked. He knew what we needed. The man knew horses. I have to say, I'm very blessed to have worked with Ned and with Keith. Very few men that I know can be at a sale and watch a pen of loose horses run down an alleyway, and they can look at them, and probably 85% of the time, they'll tell you exactly how that horse is going to ride before you even catch him and get on him. And how they knew that, I don't know. I tried to learn that from them, but the osmosis never did sink in. Anyway, but Ned was just a good friend to a lot of us, and he was always there to help everybody. A lot of good times, a lot of good memories. Fortunate for his advice that he gives us. He'd help me with the horse market, kind of give me an idea. Hey, hang on to those horses, don't sell them yet. I think the market's going to do this or that. And he was usually right. He based his advice upon experience. And he was a great mentor. Like Matthew said, and I appreciate the things that I learned from him and the things that he helped me with. And I know same is true for many of you here today. And here in a little bit, we're going to give everybody an opportunity, if it wants to, if you'd like to come down and share some experiences or even just some funny stories. And I know there's a few stories about a wagon wreck here or there, or something about the wagon being tied to the bobcat to keep the horses from running off. There's millions of them, so we would invite you to come and share some of those stories here in a little bit with us. I want to read a section of scripture to you here, though. It's taken from Luke chapter 10, and it starts in verse 25. And many of you know this story. This is the story of the Good Samaritan. I'd just like to read it again and kind of refresh our memory about it. The story begins in verse 25 that a certain lawyer stood up and put Jesus to the test and said to him, "Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?" And he said to him, "What is written in the law? How does it read to you?" And the lawyer answered and said, "And ye shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And Jesus answered him, and he said, "You have answered correctly. Do this, and you will live." But the lawyer, wanting to justify himself, said to Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" And Jesus replied, and he told this story. He said, a certain man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among the robbers, and they stripped him and beat him and went off, leaving him half dead. And by chance, a certain priest was going down the road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. And likewise, a Levite also, when he came to that place and saw him, he passed by on the other side. But a certain Samaritan, who was on a journey, came upon him, and when he saw him, he felt compassion, and he came to him and bandaged up his wounds, and pouring oil and wine on them, and he put him on his own beast, and he brought him to an inn and took care of him. And on the next day he took the 2 denarii from his pocket, and he gave them to the innkeeper, and he said, take care of him, and whatever you spend more, when I return, I will repay you. Which one of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? And the lawyer said, the man who showed mercy. And that's exactly right. And you know what? I want to make one point about that story that Jesus said there. That Samaritan man was despised by the people that Jesus was talking to that day. See, Jesus was talking to Jews. And Jews despised Samaritans. They thought that they were the dogs of the world. And if you kind of think about that a little bit, Jesus used that to make a point. That we, in our lives every day, need to be careful about how we treat those around about us. I think our nation right now is very evident of that. We need more neighbors. We need to strive to be more neighborly to those around about us. Not that Ned was a perfect man. None of us are perfect. We all make mistakes. We all try to do the best we can. But we need to look at the example that Ned set for us, the mentor that he was for all of us. I look around this room and I see a lot of people that Ned has helped, myself especially. He was a good neighbor to us, and I encourage each of us to continue in his legacy. Don't let that leave here today. Let's continue his legacy of being a good neighbor and helping others. You know, I want one quick little story, and I'll end. Ned was giving me a ride one time to Billings, and we were going to the sale barn, and I don't remember why I was riding with him, but I was at that time, and we were driving, and we get to pick up Longmont, and we leave, and we take off, truck and trailer, and it's Ned's pickup, and we get to Casper, and we stop, and the Flying J where we always stopped at, and he gets fuel and a cup of coffee, and I asked Ned, I said, Ned, you want me to drive a little bit here? You looking like you might be getting a little tired. I'd be happy to take over. Ned, no, I'm fine. I'm just getting warmed up good. We hadn't been very far yet. I said, well, I'm a pretty good driver. I drive truck and trailers all the time. Happy to drive, for right now if you want to. No, I'm good. So we get in a pickup and we go on to Billings. Well, let me illustrate what I mean by this story. So if this was the dashboard of the pickup, Ned is driving with his coffee, right? Well, the pickup had a bench seat in it. Over on my side of the truck, here's the dashboard. I'm like this. I'm like, Ned, you sure you don't want me to drive? No, Ned, I really do. I appreciate him a lot. He was a good friend. I appreciate the family for letting me be here today and to talk and to remember some good times and some good lessons that I learned, and just appreciate him a lot. We still have horses at the ranch that Ned brought us years ago, and they're still faithfully working. And it's just an excellent time. If anybody's got any stories you'd like to share, well, stand up where you are if you want. You're welcome to come down here or whatever.
I rode 64 horses a day for Ned for 3 days in a row. I'd get off one and get on another. And he ran them through the sale at Clovis and then took them to Dalhart. I went 3,288 miles on the Texas Sesquicentennial wagon train for Paul Brugman, and our one wagon that was sponsored by Billy Bob's in Texas and U.S. Tobacco belonged to Ned Little. And but the best thing is when Paul Brugman was hurt up at Bozeman, Montana, he was in a coma for 9 months. And Colleen and Ned took care of him when he came out of that coma. Wonderful man, wonderful wife, good people.
I'm moving a lot of stuff around my place. The neighbor comes down with his skidster. You're a very brave person. That's, this is really true. For some unknown reason, and it's been several weeks away before Ned passed, here's the neighbor on this skidster, and it suddenly turns white with a complete roll cage on it. And I got chills. And Matthew, there was many a times that skidster ended up this way. And good to meet you, Matthew.
He was there when I had my first baby, and he came to see me, the first person at the hospital, and he asked me, where did I get that little Mexican baby? And then when I had the second one, he said, when are you going to quit nursing those pups? So Colleen and Ned there, yeah.
Ned and Colleen meant the world to my family. Colleen visited my father in the hospital every day when he was in rehabilitation. And I want you to know that how much we love you. And Ned Little was probably solely responsible for my father's financial being when he came out of that wreck. He gave him horses at cheap, and then my father would mess with them and sell them, and Ned would give him the money. Ned was responsible for a lot of my education growing up in the horse business. And I remember in the spring of 2000, I had heard Ned say a lot of words, whether it be red roan or black horse or whatever, but as I grew up, Ned's favorite word was Matthew. And he talked about Matthew a bunch to me. He called me in the spring of 2000 and said, I bought the best looking horse that I've ever bought today. Now, those of you that know Ned Little and know how many horses he traded, that made a big impact on me. I wanted to see this horse. And he said, I'm going to bring him to you, and I want you to break him for my grandson, Matthew. And I couldn't wait till he showed up. And he unloaded a black horse that he had bought at the Miles City Bucking Horse Sale. And he told me I had Royce Ford with me, and I was going to throw Royce up there on that horse bareback. And an older gentleman told me I wouldn't do that to that boy. He said, I know where that horse come from. And so he unloaded the best looking horse that I've ever seen to this day. And I don't mean pretty, I mean cowboy, handsome, good looking horse. He had a short back and little bitty ears and a nice small muzzle and a long shoulder, and his mane hung way down below his neck and his tail, and he stood about 15 hands. I rode that horse all summer. I did everything that I've ever known to do to a horse and everything I'd ever heard to do to a horse. And at the end of the summer, Ned called me and said, how's that black horse? And I said, Ned, I can ride him, but I do not know of another human being that I hate bad enough that I would put him on that horse. And I left him in my one-horse trailer at McDonald's down here at Dakota Exit, and Ned came and picked him up because we had missed connections. And Ned was a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful man. And I will never forget these times that I had with him and the lessons that I learned. The first lesson I ever learned about Ned Little was the first time I realized what it was like for a man to marry above his stature and over his head. I remember specifically thinking, that doesn't make any sense. And it wasn't until I was much older that I realized what a quality individual he was to attract such a fine woman in Colleen. But as I finished, I wanted to tell you that you meant the world to us, and we loved you very much. And thank you.
I met Ned and Colleen back about the late 60s after my first failed marriage. I was about one day from sleeping under a bridge. Ned brought me home from Brush, Colorado, the horse sale. I stayed with him all winter long. Stayed with him the next winter. We hauled a lot of killers, broke a lot of colts. He bought a lot of colts back then because they were a little cheaper, but he bought the right kind and the good kind. But the one thing he did teach me was how to not get hurt. He'd buy broncs, he'd buy colts, he bought them all. We had runaways with teams, I'm telling you, tore up fences, but we always came out alive. After the second year, he dropped me off at North Platte. I went on the Wild West show with Monty Montana Jr. Then I really learned how to get in wrecks. Come back home, stayed with him for 4 winters, and I ended up in Clovis, New Mexico, where I rode auction horses there. Ned would come down and stay with me. He'd give me little orders. I'd buy studs or whatever, bring them to him. And it went on for a while. And then I went off to, that's a different story, I went off to the movie business, but I started training fallen horses and trick horses, and it was all stuff that he taught me how to not get hurt. But the one thing that Matthew said that really made a lot of sense, he showed you how to read people. And I'm telling you, he knew how to read people. He could smell a phony coming through that door, and he didn't have time for it. And he says there's leaders and there's followers. Take your choice, where you going to be. But he was a good man. He was a good friend, and his family met the world. And Rick, well, that's a different story. He was like a little brother. Anyway.
Yeah. If I never ever needed a horse to shoe, all I had to do was call Ned, and he'd have several. They wasn't always the best to work on, and was a few that was hanging upside down, but we got shoes on. But my favorite story of Ned is Roxy and I was just youngly married. We was living over by south of Longmont, and Ned had been to Miles City to the bucking horse sale, and he calls me, he says, I've got a team I want you to break. He says, they're good ones. Okay. But they get there, and we unloaded them into my round pen, and they had never been touched, never had a halter on them. Before it was over, they tore my round pen down, but I got a harness on them, and I got them driving, and Ned had a sale at Longmont at the fairgrounds. He says, drive them SOBs to the fairgrounds, and we'll sell them. Well, I'd never taken the harness off these horses until the day we sold them. And Roxy just knew that we probably sold them some little old lady was going to plow our garden with this pair of horses. And they probably buried her there. And the little old lady's probably buried in her garden. I don't know. But I was telling Colleen a story the other day, and I can just imagine Ned doing this. My grandpa told me this story when I was a kid, and I asked, how in the world do you stay married to the same woman for so long? Well, it's easy. And I'm thinking, okay, how easy can it be? He says, well, when we first got married on our honeymoon night, I had an old crippled buggy horse. And we was trotting down the deal, and he says, that horse tripped once, and he says, I told that horse that's one. And pretty quick, that horse trips again, and he says, that's twice. Pretty quick, this darn horse trips again, and he says, I got off the buggy, I shot the horse. Colleen went to say something, and I said, that's once.
I'm Ken Newens, and I worked on Ned and Colleen's horses, and that in itself was an experience. But Ned was the greatest horseman I've ever been around bad horses. And, Ned had a few horses that weren't as gentle as they could be, and he would, when he got ready to sell one, he would put a twitch on them, and remember the old clippers that sounded like a sewing machine? And he would feather these horses' legs with just a twitch on. I've never seen anybody that could do that. One day Ned called me and he said, I need your help. And when Ned said, I need your help, I'm a half hour late already. And got over there and said, what's going on? He said, I can't get this horse feathered. I've given him Ace Promazine. I said, how much did you give him? A whole bottle. and it wasn't working. So he said, well, you need to anesthetize this horse for me. And I did, and laid him down, and the horse was still kicking at us. So, and then Ned and Colleen decided to get into the broodmare business. And they had some really pretty mares that weren't as gentle as they could be, Doc. And I'd get over there, and remember Ned's hitching rack with concrete, and Colleen would have 5 or 6 mares tied up, and they wanted me to, they were going to AI these mares, so I had to do rectals on them. And Colleen would tie one mare's foot up, and she'd throw a fit, fall down, get back up, and then I'd do a rectal exam on them. So Colleen was just as good a hand as Ned was. And I guess my favorite thing was when my girls were about that tall, we'd go over to Ned and Colleen's for a Bible study, and my girls called him Little Ned. Yeah. So anyway, he was one of the neatest, best horsemen and best people that I've ever met. One more thing, if you decided to buy a horse from Ned, he said, this is what I want for him. You said, great, I'll take it. Because if you started horse trading with Ned, it was going to cost you a lot more money.
Anything I ever wanted in the horse business, Ned Witten got it for me. From introducing me 30 years ago to Harry Bold, working 30 years there, to Binkelman, to Billings, to Oklahoma City. I get a call one day and they say, is this Sammy, the auctioneer? And I go, yeah. And he goes, would you like to sell horses every Friday in Oklahoma or El Reno? I said, yeah. He said, how much? And I told him. He said, buy as many airplane tickets as you can buy. He says, come sell my horses. And I said, do you want to hear me before I go invest in all this? And he said, nah. There's a little man sitting across from me, and he says, if you're good enough to sell my horses, you're good enough to sell his. And Ned got me anything I ever wanted. And Ned, Colleen, they're family. And I love them all. Yeah.
Ned is he taught me about how to treat my brother. Okay, we went out to his ranch, and we were fixing fence, and he'd have us go out and open the gates for him. And we'd been harassing my brother. This other kid, I don't remember who it was, but we were picking on him and teasing him. And so Ned says, "Get out and open that gate." So we got out and we opened the gate. And by the time we had it shut, he drove through. And he just kept on going. You couldn't even see the house, and we didn't know where we were. But he left us, and by the time we got back to that house, he says, "You gonna pick on your brother anymore?" And I said, "No, sir, I will not." And one other time, he got bad hurt, I believe, from a gate. And I just got my driver's license. He says, "Will you drive me to Nebraska?" And I said, "Well, I've never pulled a horse trailer before." He says, "Well, anybody can do it." So he's sitting in the passenger seat and passes out, and I'm just heading towards, which I've never been to Nebraska, so I didn't know where I was going. And I was doing pretty good. I was white-knuckled the whole way, and I'd woke him up every 5 minutes. "Where do I turn? Where do I turn?" And he says, "You'll know it when you get there. Just leave me be." And we got there, but I was terrified the whole way there and the whole way back, and he just thought it was the funniest thing in the world. And we do miss him, and we love him very much.
Yes, my dad and him traded horses for years. As far as the horse trading business, I think Ned was the most honest guy around. You can tell or he wouldn't have had the business he did. But one time when they have a horse sale once a month at Binkelman on Monday, our neighbor bought a horse from Ned, and the next morning he called my dad up and he said, "The horse ride's all right, but when I went to curry him, they used to roach him back then." He said his foretop come out, Ned had glued it in. And Ned was one of the best guys. He was like a dad to me. I've known him for 60-some years.
I'll tell you, when I was about 4 years old, I was learning to speak Spanish. My numbers from 1 to 10. I was at a sale ring with Dad, my mom, and my father, and I was doing my 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And that's about all I can speak to this day. And Ned heard me say it, and he grabbed me by the hand. He said, "Come with me, I want some help." He takes me over to these Mexican horse traders. And he's pointing to me, talking to them. And my mom comes over and she said, Ned, he only speaks 1 through 10. That's all he can say. He said, that's all right, honey. I ain't planning on paying much for these horses.
Ned, a year older than me. We was born and raised 3 miles apart. We lived all of our young adult lives together, day in and day night. It didn't make any difference. And as soon as we got old enough to ride the horse, Andy Anderson would have a horse sale once a month. And we'd go down and we'd buy a colt. The next horse sale, we'd bring him back, kid broke. We done that many times. Sometimes 2 or 3 heads when we got the money to buy them. We had a wonderful life all of our years. Knew Ned very, very well. Helped him out of a lot of little scrapes. Everybody wanted to pick on him because he was little. But them Kansas boys soon found out he had a big buddy. That's about all I got to say, but I've known Ned since I was old enough to see somebody. Been many, many good years.
John was a year younger than Ned. He was like 4 or 5 years old. Ned told his story repeatedly about John. In the later years, Ned got to poisoning red ants all around the place. He'd get in his golf cart, and there's no red ants on our place because he was busy. Well, he had a story about John and the red ants when they were in school. John had started to school, and John told Ned that if you stand in a red ant pile real still, they won't bite you. So Ned was a year older, so he knew that probably wasn't true. So John did what he was doing, and the next thing you know, he's screaming, the teacher's coming out, strips his clothes off, beats the ants off. John never did that again. Ned told that story over and over about John. They got in a lot of, if they would have lived today and done what they did years ago, they'd be in jail. John, and you probably remember this, Ned told about when they were in school, they went to a country school, kids of all ages. Well, the big boys were giving the teacher trouble. So their parents hired a man teacher to teach them. So Ned said he can still see this teacher standing up on the stage going like this, laying down the law. Well, sometime later, they had a tug of war outside, the girls against the boys. You remember, John? The girls against the boys, so the teacher's going to help the girls. Yeah. So he gets down there and he's helping the girls. Well, the boys getting down on the ground, get a rope around his neck and are choking him out. Right? Yeah. He left. He left. So then they hired another teacher that was probably about this big. And the first time one of the kids in that class started having, taking over, she went to throwing stuff at him and running clear off the school grounds, and he never did that again. So those are some of the stories. And then I saw Mary Ann. Mary Ann's been a friend of ours for a long time. Mary Ann was over to our house one time. You know where I'm going with this? Yeah. We had a granary for the horses, and we fed corn, shelled corn.
Here it is.
So I had put 3 tons in this granary.
Just filled it.
And Ned decides he's going to move the granary with the bobcat. So he chains onto it, and he starts jerking the legs, and I said, it's not moving. The hell it ain't! He just kept tugging on it, and pretty soon, the whole thing went over. There went 6,000 pounds. What? It missed him, yeah. The bobcat tipped upside down. He was hanging up there. There was 6,000 pounds of grain all over. And he looked at me and he said, I sure made a hell of a mess, didn't I?
And she said, Monica, get the camera.
I did. I took a picture. I took a picture. I should know where that is, but I don't. But anyway, we didn't have enough wagons to fill the grain up. A lot of it went to waste on the ground. Anyway, thank you all for coming. I so appreciate it. And wouldn't Ned be surprised to have his service here?
Yeah.
He would have been. He would have been. Thank you so much. One other thing I want to share with you and Ned was raised in a Christian home. He went to church in a team and wagon with his mother driving and his sisters. And he told me that she used to warm bricks up and put him in there to keep him warm going to church. And then when he got a little bit older, he really didn't want to go. Then she'd kind him into saying, "You want to drive Todd and Dad?" And he'd want to drive Todd and Dad. So she'd get him to go to church. Anyway, at the last few months of his life, he was doing a lot of soul searching. And I want to tell you that he accepted the Lord as his Savior. And I know where he is today. Woo! That's good.
If Ned would have been a good judge of people, it never had nothing to do with me. This story isn't true, but it should be. Was at a horse sale and Ned was there, and this girl walks up there. She's put up about like you'd want one to be. She leaned up on the counter and looked at Ned and she said, "Would you all trade a horse for sex?" Ned looked at her and he said, "What kind of a horse do you have?" Slow. I make things up, and it's hard to put a man's life in a few short lines, but here we go. He cinches that black hat on, climbs up in his truck. Another load, another road, he tries to make a buck. You don't know how lonesome you can feel. Your last pack, no turning back, 500 miles of hills. But he came to be a cowboy, and the work ain't never done. He'll be at home next Tuesday from another 2-week run. But they can't wait till tomorrow, got to make it there today. The horse is gone, they're moving on another long highway. Back at home she's worried, always on his side. Late at night she's praying that it won't be his last ride. 'Cause the weather's getting colder, call in for a foot of snow. Got a load in Billings and there's always one more road. But they can't wait till tomorrow, got to make it there today. He'll sleep in Oklahoma from another long highway. He hired on to be a cowboy, and he's run down his last road. He sleeps in the arms of Jesus with eternity to go.